So today we're going to start first by discussing international trade and factor mobility theory. And what we will be mainly trying to do is to understand why policymakers, to say, and managers to rely on international trade and factor mobility theories to achieve their economic objectives. We will talk a little bit about the historical and current rationale for interventionist and free trade theories, and gonna talk about some of the theories that can help us explain the national trade patterns as well. And in the last part, we will explain why countries' export capabilities are so dynamic and focus on the reasons for and the major effects of international factor movements. We will conclude by assessing the relationship. So there is definitely a relationship between foreign trade and international factor mobility. We're going to talk about that as well. So we know that countries are linked through trade and factor mobility, movement of people, movement of capital, as well as technology. So not only are trade and factor mobility extremely important in growing portions of the global economy, these theories to explain them do help all the governments, let's say, as well as company, to wrestle with the decisions of what, how much, and with whom they will need to trade. You see now, after the embargo, what's happening, let's say, with the prices all over the board. So that shows that countries are linked through trade and factor mobility. So this, we saw how crucial and how important it is to the international economics. So if we look at this figure that we have here, it actually shows what we discussed. Let's say when we started this lecture, if you remember that this course, if you remember the initial figure. So to meet the international objectives that the countries do have, or companies do have, a company must focus its strategy, must plan its strategy to trading and transferring its means of operations across borders. So as you can see, moving from country A to country B in these cases. Once either of these processes has taken place, then we can say that these two countries, country A and country B, are let's say connected economically. And it is through these two means of operations, either importing and exporting goods and services, which is done through trade, or it can be done, this cooperation can be done through transferring production factors like labor and capital international. So this shows how the two countries, we can say that, are connected economically. And usually countries that are close to each other, we can say that they are more connected economically. So countries, for example, within EU are more connected economically than, let's say, with countries that are much further away. For example, US, much of its economic connection has with Mexico, and we're going to talk later on about this, about with Mexico and Canada than let's say other countries around the world. So this shows how two countries, let's say in this figure, shows how the means through which two countries, we can say that, are economically interconnected. So when we talk about some of the main theories that we can use to understand this interconnection between countries, we have the interventionist and the free trade theories. So at the one extreme of trade policies, we said that the governments do intervene a great deal in trade, and that's actually what we can explain through mercantilism. So this theory holds that countries should export more than they import. So if you as a country do export more than you import, then we say that these countries do have a favorable balance of trade. This is usually referred to as the trade surplus. On the other side, when you have an unfavorable balance of trade, which is also known as a trade deficit, this indicates the opposite. That shows that you import much more than you export. However, these two terms are considered to be misnomers because the word favorable implies benefits and the word unfavorable in this case suggests impairment. Another theory which is related closely to mercantilism is the neo-mercantilism. So neo-mercantilism is the running of favorable balance of trade to achieve some social or political objectives. So countries, what they can do, for example, is they may reduce unemployment, for example, engage more workforce that are unemployed in order to encourage companies to produce in excess of what is required in the home country. And then what they can do, this surplus that they can use to produce by reducing the unemployment office, they can sell it abroad. Or what they can do is they can attempt to maintain political influence in one particular area by sending, let's say, more merchandise there than they usually receive. So the government is helping to grant merchandise aid or loans to foreign government. And the other one, we have the free trade theories. And usually when we talk about the free trade theories, it developed, or it was, let's say, for the reason to answer particular questions. In particular, why do countries need to trade at all? Why particular countries, let's say, or any country in the world cannot be content with the goods and services it produces itself? So, and to start from here, we all know that no single country has all the, let's say, the natural resources to produce anything that they need. They don't have the geographic conditions, the technology necessary to produce everything that we consume nowadays. So that's why we need to trade, because you can produce certain things, however, you need to buy other things in order, either as a raw material or as final products itself. Because you cannot produce, either you don't have technology, either you don't have geographical conditions that can help you, you don't have the you don't have the, let's say, the raw material to produce in this case. That's why you will need to trade with other countries in order to obtain this input that you will need later on to produce the outputs that you can sell to your country. So with regards to this, we have two main theories that have been developed. The first one is the absolute advantage, and the other one is the comparative advantage. And both of these theories imply specialization. So just as us as individuals or our families, let's say, we do produce an excess of specialized goods and services in exchange for, let's say, other more specialized goods and services. The same happens when we talk about nations or countries at more macro level. So they export their specialized surplus, let's say, surpluses, and then the money that they get by selling this surplus, what they do is they pay to import things that they need. In these particular cases, for the benefits of their own countries. So when we talk about the absolute advantage holds that different countries produce different things more efficiently than others, and that consumers should not have to buy domestically produced goods when they can buy them more cheaply abroad. So if there is something that let's say you can buy more cheaply abroad, so why waste resources to produce that in your country when production would cost you much more than buying abroad? So then you focus on doing something which you can do more efficiently, and then with the money that you're going to sell this thing, you can buy the other thing that costs much cheaper, let's say, in some other countries. And it's mainly through specialization that countries can increase their efficiency, and they can do this mainly for three reasons. For example, labor could become more skilled by, let's say, producing or repeating the same task, and this increases the efficiency. Also, labor would not lose time in switching production from one kind of product to another kind of product. And also, larger amounts of production would provide incentives for developing more, let's say, effective working method. That's why we say that specialization in these cases does increase efficiency, because, as I said, labor skills do improve, less time is lost by not switching production, and then it helps motivate or incentivize better working methods. When we talk about absolute advantage, countries do have their natural advantage, and usually this comes from climatic conditions, access to certain natural resources, or availability of particular labor forces in these particular countries. For example, Taiwan is one of the major exports. Used to be, let's say, tea in these cases. They still export, and they have advantage in producing because let's say, its high elevations give, let's say, to the tea unique taste, and it can be easily produced. So it has this favor, either geographic, climate conditions, that you can produce particular thing much more easier and better than in some other countries. So this is what, let's say, gives these countries to say a natural advantage. However, most of the countries today and most of the world trade is done through manufactured goods that do compete, and this is through acquired advantage. That's something that countries do acquire. So some are more innovative in terms of technology, so those are more advanced compared to other countries, and this is mainly by using product technology or process technology. Usually when we talk about product technology, this helps the countries to produce a unique product or one that is, let's say, more easily distinguished from those of competitors. For example, we know Swiss watches, for example. So they are known for their uniqueness. So this helps the country to produce unique product that can be easily distinguished. So anyone would look for a Swiss watch, for example, nowadays. And on the other side, we have the process technology. And process technology on the other side does help the countries, let's say, to more efficiently produce a homogeneous product, a product that can be easily distinguished from their, let's say, from their competitors. That's why we can say that countries that do develop product or process technologies, they have acquired their acquired advantage in these cases, which is different from natural advantage. Natural advantage is something, let's say, that you have because your country is based on particular part of the globe that gives them, let's say, an advantage because you have different climate conditions that you cannot find in other places, different terrain, geographical location, as well as access to certain natural resources. Acquired is something that you as a country acquire, either through product technology or through, let's say, through process technology as well. And then on the other side, compared to the absolute advantage of the countries, we do have also the comparative advantage. And comparative advantage says that global efficiency gains may still result from trade if countries specialize in what it can produce most efficiently, regardless of the absolute advantage that countries in these cases do have. So gains that countries do receive from trade will occur even in a country that has absolute advantage in all the products. Because as I said, the countries must give up less efficient output to produce, let's say, more efficient output in these cases. And if we look at this figure that we have here, 6.2. So it's only an assumption, for example. So in these cases, as you can see, Taiwan has 100 units of resource available, 10 units. They need 10 units to produce a ton of wheat and 4 units to produce a ton of tea. And they will need to use half of the total resources for product when there is no foreign trade in these cases, compared to the United States that, for example, needs has 100 units of resources available. To produce a ton of wheat, they will need 5 units, whereas to produce a ton of tea, they need 20 units in this case. So you see the difference actually. To produce a ton of tea, they will need 20 units in these cases. So they need 5 units to produce a ton of wheat. So maybe they can focus all their units to produce wheat and then maybe buy the tea from Taiwan in this case, which might be much cheaper from them. So in these cases, how looking at this picture, how can production be increased through specialization and trade? So let's say the two countries have no foreign trade in these cases, and if we assume that each of these countries devotes half of its 100 resources to production of each product, and as you can see in this figure, Taiwan can only produce, if we look here, Taiwan can only produce 12.5 tons of tea, and this is because we divide 50 by 4, because we said it uses half of the total resources per product when there is no foreign trade. And here we assume, as we said, that there is no foreign trade. So this, with half of units, Taiwan can produce 12.5 tons of teas, and they can produce, if you look down here, only with the 50%, they can produce only 5 tons of wheat. This is the what they can produce. Compared to them, for example, United States can produce only 2.5 tons of 2.5 ton of tea. However, on the other side, they can produce with only 50% of the capacity that they have. They can produce 10 tons of wheat here. So, because each of these countries has only 100 of units of resources available, we can say that neither can increase the wheat production without decreasing the tea production. So in these cases, United States would not be able to produce 20 tons of wheat if they do not decrease these 2.5 tons of tea. So if United States would like to produce 20 tons of wheat, they would need to give up this 2.5 tons of tea. The same thing with let's say with Taiwan. If they would like to produce more tea, so they would have to give up these 5 tons of wheat to produce 25 tons of tea in this case. So this is how countries can use or leverage this absolute advantage. And the other figure that we have here, it's actually an illustration of comparative advantage. It's the same example that we had earlier. So we have two countries, each with total 100 of units of resources available here, and half of each of these resources. So 50% is used in each product. So 50% of resources to produce, in these cases, tea, and 50% of resources to produce, let's say, wheat in these cases. So with 50% of resources, it takes Taiwan 10 units of resources to produce either a ton of tea or a ton of wheat, whereas it takes the United States only 5 units to produce a ton of tea and 4 units for a ton of wheat. So if we look at this example here, we can say that Taiwan can produce 5 tons of tea and 5 tons of wheat, as you see here, point A here, with the resources, the 100 units that they have. On the other side, if you look at the United States, they can produce 10 tons of tea and 12.5 tons of wheat, which is the point B that you can see here, with the available resources that we have here. So although we can see from this figure that United States mainly has an absolute advantage in producing both of the commodities compare to Taiwan, because they can produce, in these cases, in this example, much cheaply and more efficiently. However, we can say that United States has a more comparative advantage only in wheat, because with the same amount of resources that they can put, they can produce much more wheat than they can produce tea in these cases, which was the point B here. However, without trade, the combination is 15 ton of tea, which is 5 in Taiwan plus 10 in the United States that they can buy, and 17.5 tons of wheat. If we take 5 from Taiwan and in producing tea, and 5 in producing wheat, which would make in these cases what we have here 17 and 17.5. Considering that they have 12.5 and 5 they gain by engaging in trade. So through trading, the combined production of the commodities within the two countries can be increased. That's why if we combine wheat production from when there was no trade, United States could produce all 17.5 tons by using 70 units of resources, and the remaining 30 units or 30 resources they could use to produce 6 tons of tea, which is 30 divided by 5, because we said the maximum they can produce is 5 units per ton, and this can be shown actually in the figure that we have here, the point D that we have here. So if we look at the combined wheat production, it has stayed 17.5 ton. However, the tea production in these cases, it has increased from 15 to 16 tons in these cases, mainly because of these countries engaging in trade. And if the combined tea production is unchanged from the time before trade, what Taiwan could do is they could use all its resources to produce more tea, and then this would give 10 tons, and which is actually what we can see in this point C. So they would give up on wheat, and these 5 here, they would produce, they would focus mainly on producing tea and not produce any wheat at all in these cases. However, United States in these cases could produce the remaining 5 tons of tea by using 25 of its units, because we said they will need 5 units to produce a ton of tea in these cases, and they could use the remaining 75 units to produce 18.75 tons of wheat, which is why we have it the point E here. So more or less, this is how countries can use absolute and comparative advantages in these cases. There are some other important theories that we need to mention at least, and those are the theories to explain national trade patterns. So when we talked about free trade theories, those demonstrate mainly how output growth happens or occurs through specialization and free trade that the countries do have. However, they do not deal with trade patterns, things like how much a country trades, what kind of products the countries do trade, and who will be the trade partners of these countries. And some of these theories explaining national trade to provide an answer to how much these countries trade who are their trade partners, and what kind of products do trade. So to the question, how much does a country trade? Free trade theories of specialization do not propose nor imply that only one country should or will produce a given product or service. There are some kind of non-tradable goods, products and services that are seldom practical to export because of high transportation costs. And this is something that you produce in every country. For example, haircuts, retail grocery distributions. This is something that you have everywhere. That's not something that you can transport somewhere else. And you have these things in each and single country. However, when we talk about tradable goods, it's important, let's say, to use these theories to explain why these countries do depend on import and export more than other countries. And this is the theory of country size that explains this. According to this theory, countries that have larger land masses, usually they depend less on trade than smaller ones. So according to this theory, bigger countries are less dependent on smaller countries when we talk about exporting and importing. That's why they are apt to have more different varied climates and assorted of natural resources that can make them more self-sufficient. For example, we know the territory of Russia, for example, China, India, United States, for example. So they do have not only the, let's say, the natural resources, but varied climates as well, because it's big in different parts of the country. We have different climate, which gives them advantage in the production of different kinds of products in these cases that would not be available in let's say in other countries. There is also another important factor in these cases, and that's the distance to foreign markets that affects large and small countries differently. And usually we know that the further the distance, the higher the transport costs are. The longer the inventory carrying time, we know that the greater the uncertainty and unreliability of timely product delivery. And there is another theory that explains how much do the countries trade, and that's the size of the economy. On one side, while land area, what we discussed here, does help explain the relative dependence on trade. We said that the larger countries in terms of area are less dependent to smaller countries. This theory, the size of the economy, shows that countries' economic size helps explain absolute differences in the amount of trade. And the world's largest four economies, if you look at the statistics, are the top four exporting countries in this case. It's the countries that export the most. So what we can understand from this is that the largest economies do produce so much that they have more to sell, not only in their own countries, but also internationally. And most of the developing countries do trade, let's say, is with the developed countries. So we see now the trade that has been done because of the economic growth that happened in China and India. And all of them are developing countries that mainly do trade with some of the, mainly with the developed countries, United States or European Union. To the question, what types of products does a country trade? We have the three main theories. We talked earlier about process technology and product technology. One particular theory that explains what types of products does a country trade, we have the factor proportions theory. This theory holds that differences in countries' proportional endowments of labor, land, and capital does help us to explain in these cases the differences that these countries have in the endowments cost. So if labor were abundant in comparison to land and capital, So in these countries, labor costs would be low relative to land and capital costs. So if you have scarce labor in one particular country, this would cost the countries much more, for example, than if they would have more land and capital resources. So these relative factor costs would lead to countries, let's say, to be more or to excel, to be much better in the production and export of products that use their, let's say, abundant and cheaper production factors that they have in these cases. So production, on the other side, factors, as I said, land and labor is not something that is homogeneous. We know that there are differences internationally. On the other side, companies also, what they can do is they can substitute capital for labor, and this will depend on the cost of each, let's say, each resources that these countries do have available. So when we talk about the process technology, according to the factor proportions analysis or theory, this becomes more complicated when the same product can be created by different methods, either through labor or through capital intensity in these cases. So on the other side, when we talk about product technology, in these cases, manufacturing is the largest sector in world trade, and competitiveness depends mainly on technology to develop new products and processes. So it's this technology input in the process of production that they use that can give to countries, let's say, more advantage. That's why lots of countries do, let's say, invest more on innovation, research and development, because this depends, the advantage that they get on product technology will depend on a large number of highly educated people that these countries have, but also on the large amount of capital that they have available to invest in research and develop. And because developed countries, we talk about developed countries, have an abundance of these features, that's why even nowadays, these countries are more able to originate most new products and account for most of manufacturing output and trade. And this is mainly because they do have this product technology available. On the other side, these theories can also explain with whom do countries trade. And here we do have particular theories that do explain. The first one is the country similarity theory. And this says that companies do create new products in response to market conditions in their home market. And then once they do turn to markets that they see as most similar. For example, we have United States and United Kingdom. Because of their cultural similarities, they would mainly trade with these countries, or for example, Canada in their border. They are both English speaking, although there are parts that they speak French. However, mainly they turn to markets that they see as most similar to what they are accustomed, especially those markets, let's say, when they think that their customers are, let's say, are the same, or even they are, let's say, comparable levels of per capita income. So when we talk about country similarity theory, we have the specialization and acquired advantage in these cases. So we talked about acquired as advantage earlier. So if they would like to export, these companies must provide consumers abroad with an advantage over what they could buy from their domestic produce. So you have to provide something to them extra, an advantage that they cannot get by buying, let's say, a product domestically. So that's why they would turn to a product that is available internationally. And in these cases, trade mainly happens because companies in a given country as we said earlier, do spend more time in research and development in some particular sectors than in others. And this is what leads these countries, let's say, in specialization and acquired knowledge. For example, Germany, we know that it is traditionally strong in machinery and equipment. Oleg maybe can, let's say whether it's right or wrong, but I think Switzerland is also known for being, let's say, for having this specialization advantage in pharmaceutical products compared to, let's say, to other countries. And we have some of the well-known pharma industry is well developed here in Switzerland, with some of the main companies like Novartis, Roche, for example, which actually have the lead, although Switzerland is much smaller country. And this mainly occurs because, as I said, these companies or these countries do invest a lot or more in research and development in these particular sectors compared to other sectors, because they would like to achieve this specialization and acquired advantage that they can use then to trade internationally. Even, for example, developing countries nowadays, they can gain advantages. But they do this mainly in very narrow segments of the industry. For example, Bangladesh, if you go and check, I don't know, different kinds of shirts, you see that lots of production comes from Bangladesh. So they have succeeded in exporting the shirts, trousers, hats. So this is a particular segment where they have gained this particular advantage. Another important aspect that helps to explain with whom do countries trade is product differentiation. And product differentiation causes countries to conduct two-way trade in seemingly, let's say, similar products. And this mainly occurs because companies differentiate products, as I said earlier, by creating two-way trade in products that can be the same. For example, the United States is both a major exporter and major importer of tourist services, of vehicles, passenger aircraft, because different companies from different countries have developed product variations with different appeal. As an example, we have both Boeing that comes from the United States, Airbus is European producers that they produce large passenger jets. However, airlines buy both of their aircrafts because their models differ in, let's say, different capacities, flying range, also in terms of fuel consumption, as well as perceived reliability. So United States or companies do not only buy a US product, which would be here in this case is Boeing, but they do also buy, let's say, products that are manufactured in other parts of the world. Cultural similarity is also important issue, because trading partners are affected by cultural similarity, also affected based on the political relations between countries, as well as the distance among these countries. Because we said that distance also means transportation costs. So you would mainly have much more trade, let's say, with a country that is close to you, that would have less transportation costs than exporting to another country that entails much more transportation costs. On the other side, cultural similarity. Importers and exporters, they perceive greater ease in doing business, let's say, with countries that are culturally similar to their, let's say, to their home country. As an example, for example, we have, if you look back at the France's colonial history in Africa, this has given, for example, companies like Air France an edge in these cases to serve the continent's international air passenger markets. On the other side, trade is also, we said, affected by political relationships and economic agreements among the countries. For example, countries within the EU, Switzerland, and the agreement that they have with EU countries. So this is how political relations between countries do affect, let's say, their economic relationships that they are going to develop with these countries. It's also important to explain and to know some of the dynamics of export capabilities. So, and here, what we're going to discuss is some of the theories that help us to explain how countries develop, how countries maintain, and how countries lose their competitive advantage that they have when we talk about particular products. And this can be mainly explained by the PLC theory, which is the product life cycle theory. And this theory states that the production location of certain manufactured products shifts as they go through their life cycle. And we know that there are four main stages of the PLC. It's the introduction of a product, then comes the growth, then you reach maturity. And then once you reach maturity, either you go down or you maintain, let's say, that level. So it will depend a lot, let's say, that the production location of certain manufactured product will shift as they will go through their life cycle. So, for example, when we talk about the introduction stage, it's mainly marked by innovation in response to observed needs, exporting by the innovative country, and evolving product, for example, characteristics. And once you move to the growth stage, in this stage, you are mainly characterized by increases in exports by the innovating countries, more competition, also increased capital intensity, as well as some foreign production. And once you reach maturity, in this stage, it's mainly characterized by decline in exports from the innovating countries. So the country that is innovating will reduce the export. There will be more product standardization, more capital intensity. There will be also increased competitiveness of the price, as well as production startups in emerging economies that you will have to compete with in these cases. And then we have the last stage. As the product moves into the decline stage, there will be more concentration of production in developing countries, and on the other side, an innovating country would become a net importer, actually, in this particular cases. And one important thing, especially to better understand, let's say, international trade, is this diamond of national competitive advantage. This helps to explain why have countries developed and sustained a different competitive advantage. And this theory shows four features to be important for competitive superiority. As you can see here, we have the demand conditions. So, are consumers likely to buy what we can produce with the using the factor conditions that we have above? So you cannot, let's say, produce luxury products, expensive products, when, let's say, your consumers are not likely to buy. For example, the net capita income is low, for example, in these cases. Factor conditions are sufficient quantities and combinations of the quality of labor, capital, and raw material available to at acceptable prices. So would you be able to produce something by having in consideration these factor conditions under acceptable prices? Also, another important factor are the related and supporting industries. So can these companies outsource production of sufficient components and services to allow them to concentrate their efforts on what they can do best? So is there any opportunity for them to outsource particular part of the production, and mainly they focus on, let's say, on doing what they can best do here? And the last, let's say, important factor is the company strategy, structure, and rivalry. So will competitive conditions and the reactions in these cases to them will help these companies to evolve their operations in order to be able not only to sustain but to also improve their market position in this case. So this theory explains why certain countries have developed and how they have developed their sustained. Another important theory that we have here is the factor mobility theory that we said we're gonna discuss from the beginning. And when we talk about the factor mobility theory, that mainly focuses on why production factors move. And the focus of this theory is also on the effects of those movements on transforming countries' factor endowments and the impact of international factor mobility trade in these cases. And when we talk about why, let's say, why factors do move in these cases, we have to take into consideration some particular aspects. For example, people and capital do move international, and mainly they do move to gain more income. So I am originally from North Macedonia, but I moved to Switzerland. So it's normal we move to countries where we see that we can gain more in these cases, or to flee adverse political situations. So we see what happens nowadays in Ukraine. So because of such situations, that's why people in certain cases move from country to country. Yes, Prem, you raised your hand. So is there anything you would like to ask?
Yes, sir. I have one question. How about like environment factor? If I look into the Japanese country, right? Japan country, they're moving all the production, like a Toyota cars, a lot of production factories, companies, they move to the other country because of the environment factor, like an earthquake. Okay, so how that environment factors affect to the free trade economic?
Well, it's not. They are not the first thing. That's why I said they focus on, let's say, outsourcing part of the production or moving somewhere else where they can do it better and much cheaply. For example, that's why countries do move, and this is mainly because free trade allows them. So they can produce something somewhere else, and then no matter where they produce it, they can sell it internationally. So because of this free trade, that's not important where you produce something. We know, for example, even iPhones, we know that those are not manufactured in the United States, for example. We know, let's say, there have been some issues actually with their production, for example, in China, and how they treat their employees. So in these cases, this is what the companies do to leverage in these cases, and mainly we said they do it. They move to places where they can produce cheaply because of the cheap, let's say, cheap labor costs in particular countries. For example, you cannot produce something in Switzerland much cheaply that you can produce in some other countries because of the salary, because of the production costs. And in certain cases, countries move to particular countries because of the availability of the natural resources in these countries. So you move close to natural resources because then you can get access, or in certain cases, as you mentioned, to avoid, let's say, particular adverse conditions that can cause problems to these companies. So that's why, let's say, they move to places where they can, let's say, avoid these kind of let's say, problems that they can have in producing or manufacturing. And because of this free trade internationally, they don't have problems where they produce, so they can easily transfer their products, sell their products internationally in this case.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
Okay, and then we have why these production factors move is the effects of factor movements, and this is something that actually we have a lot nowadays, and this is what we mainly known or referred to as brain drain. This is the effect of outward migration on the country. So countries lose potentially productive resources when educated people leave the country, and this is what we call brain drain. I can tell you an example from North Macedonia, the country that I'm originally from. Many of the medical staff, we had a case last year that a section of the hospital was closed because of many of the workers actually moving to Germany. Germany needed medical staff, health staff. So what they did, many of them left to Germany. And we said earlier, they mainly move because they can either gain much more or to adverse, let's say, adverse political situations that are happening in one particular country. And this is when the brain of your country actually moves abroad. And this is why many let's say, governments try to, let's say, stipulate different policies to retain their brain in their country. And this is what the North Macedonian government actually tried to do. They increased the salaries of health workers, provided other benefits to them in order to, let's say, keep them in the country. And this is a problem that many, let's say, many countries do have with their especially educated workforce having or trying to move in other parts of the world where they can obtain much more benefits in these cases. Also, when we talk about the relationship between trade and factor mobility, this is something that we said we gonna discuss at loss. So it's important to understand how the international factor mobility can affect the trade, and it can affect through substitution or through complementarity. When we talk about factor proportions, that we know that we discussed it earlier, they do vary widely among countries. In these cases, there exists a pressure for the abundant factors to move to countries that are having, let's say, greater scarcity when they can command a better return in these cases. So if permitted, many in the labor pool where workers are unemployed or poorly paid, they go, as I mentioned earlier, to countries when they can have full employment, they can have also higher wages or salaries in this case. So they receive higher salaries, not because in these cases of the greater scarcity, but also because of, let's say, going to capital-rich countries that have invested a lot in technology and infrastructure, and this makes the imported laborers or employers more productive that they can be in their home countries. So this is how substitution actually affects international factor mobility. On the other side, we have complementarity, so it can complement in these cases. And factor mobility, mainly through foreign investment, often stimulates trade because of the need for components that the countries do have. Also, if the parent company's ability to sell complementarity products, also because of the need for equipment for subsidiaries in this case. That's why, for example, many exports would not occur without foreign investments. We know there are foreign investments. For example, the case of what was mentioned earlier, Japanese companies moving in other countries, that is a foreign investment, and they use these foreign investments then to sell. And this happens partly because a company may export equipment as part of the investment in these cases. Could you please?
Halo saya. Adana Putra. I come and pick up your money. You say going with Chinese, right? That means no. Money go with him. I'll finish.
Can you please mute the mic? I cannot find no voice.
Sorry.
Okay, so yeah, that was all with regards to some of the main international trade and factor mobility